Hi everybody. Today I'm going to be talking about Peril's Gate by Janny Wurts, Klara and the Sun by Ishiguro, Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky, and Foster by Keegan. The first book I have to talk about is Peril's Gate by Janny Wurts. This is book 6 in the 11-book Wars of Light and Shadow series. I'm in a read-along with A.B. Kennevan from A Critical Dragon and Philip Chase. I've been having such fantastic discussions with those two, and we just posted our Peril's Gate discussion over on Philip's channel. So if you're reading the series and you want to hear our thoughts, you could check out that video, or if you read the series in the future and you want to check out our thoughts later, maybe add it to your watch later list if you're interested in what we have to say. This particular book is a pivotal book in this series, I would say, because we do have a circular pattern in this series. We have certain storylines that seem to repeat themselves throughout the series, but there is a transformation that happens in this particular book. So I can't give away too much because of spoilers, but what I can say is that this book deals with rebirth, renewal, self-sacrifice, and it has to do with true power as acknowledgement of self. And that acknowledgement of self is an integration of past traumas, of past transgressions, things that we feel guilty about, areas we don't want to look at because it's uncomfortable. But it's also an acknowledgement of that which is good within us, which is very difficult to do. Sometimes it's much easier to see what's wrong with ourselves, to be self-critical or self-effacing, than it is to acknowledge what is actually good about ourselves or what we are good at doing, our talent, our innate goodness. There is such a great interplay of character psychology and the metaphysics of this world, as it is the wars of light and shadow. So all of these things are interconnected. The magic in this world, the history of this world, the emotional state of characters, their perception of self, the ways that the environment interacts with people, and the way that people interact with the environment. All these things are interconnected. It is the wars of light and shadow, so of course there is light and shadow, but there is also magic based on this whole entire spectrum of frequency. There are what are called magical lanes, and there is music magic, as music is frequency. So there are these really fantastic passages depicting that magic, depicting that journey of self. And I think it was very powerful in certain passages. There was one particular passage that moved me to tears that I talked about in our discussion. And I really love the way certain quotes, certain beautiful passages and moments are echoed throughout the series, and how they apply not just to one character, but several characters. I will say that enjoyment-wise overall, however, my enjoyment took a dip in this particular installment. There was a certain narrative device that was used that I just didn't quite enjoy reading about. I appreciated its impact in the story, what it was doing in the story. I think it did play an important role, so I could appreciate it, but I didn't enjoy reading about it, if that makes sense. There were a couple of things too that I just didn't find emotionally moved me as much as I would have preferred. But there were still wonderful discussion points. I think we had an amazing discussion over on Philip's channel. And so I'm sorry to say that this one was not a home run for me. I did have some mixed feelings about it. And if you have questions about any of what I said, please feel free to question me in the comment section below, or join the Fireside Discord. Find me there and ask me there. Klara and the Sun by Ishiguro was my first Ishiguro novel, and I did a spoiler-free review of this book, which I posted on my birthday. I could not resist reviewing this book because it was so powerful and meaningful for me. I wanted to have a review that I could point to in case anybody wanted to understand why it was so special. So this particular book deals with an AI character named Klara. This is in a near future setting. Klara and the other AI robots in the story are created to cure teenagers from loneliness. So loneliness turns out to be a very important theme in the story, but there are so many more layers to that, so many layers regarding the complexity of love, all learned through this AI perspective. And of course, she has a very special relationship with the sun. Additionally, I will say that this book checked so many boxes for me. I did a video earlier this year about things I'm loving in books right now. I did one a few years ago too, and it's a way of updating or noticing things I'm gravitating towards in books. And this one checked boxes such as a character having certain revelations. Having a revelation is one of my favorite things to find in a story. It also checked the box of relationship conflicts when people are on the same side, conflicts between friends or loved ones, not just enemies, which I think is obvious. And then also non human consciousness, which is something I find really interesting. Now, in my video, I talked about how I particularly love non human consciousness in books like Solaris by Stanislaw Lem, where the consciousness is far from being human, yet we're trying to understand it through a human lens. There's something similar in this story, except for Klara does seem deeply human in the way that she processes information, yet there is a difference. There are strange ways in which she sees the world. So there are so many boxes, like I said, that this book checked for me. And there's also such wonderful subtlety in the story, simplicity in the writing. I watched a couple of interviews with Ishiguro after I finished this book, and I got the impression that setting is not a priority for him as a writer, that he's more focused on character exploration, on theme, and then he tries to make the world or setting fit the storyline he's going for. So I think that's important to consider when reading his books, but I love his approach to that. I loved it in this story, as I've been saying over and over again. And I buddy read this book with Murphy and Jimmy, and it was a wonderful buddy read. We read about 20 pages a day, maybe 20 to 30 pages a day, and had so much to say every day that we were reading the book. So I think this is a book that has a lot of depth to it, at the same time having a beautiful simplicity of style. So again, if you want to hear more thoughts, I have a spoiler-free review, but I'm so excited to get to Never Let Me Go in October with Murphy and Jimmy. Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky, as the blurb on the back so aptly puts it, it is a murder story told from the murderer's point of view that implicates even the most innocent reader in its enormities. So this particular book, I would say, is equal parts psychological, philosophical, and social commentary. We have a character named Raskolnikov, and the name Raskolnikov, by the way, comes from the word schism. So this is a character who has a split nature in a way. He has a split in his conscience. So first I'll go ahead and say he's a former student, he's handsome, he seems like he has a lot of potential in life, but he doesn't seem very motivated in doing anything about his situation. He lives in cramped quarters. He's barely making ends meet. His landlady is the mother of his fiancée who has passed away, and he's making deals with this woman who is a tradeswoman, something like a loan shark from back in that time. And so at the same time as he's struggling, he doesn't really like people to help him out. He's very reclusive. He pushes people away. So he's rough around the edges. And at the same time, he'll be the first person to throw his last pennies at somebody who is in need on the streets. He's deeply horrified by the state of society. He's deeply troubled by the disparity that surrounds him, by the exploitation, by all of the horrors he sees that has come about due to society. And so on the one hand, he wants to rise above that. He wants to be an extraordinary man. And on the other hand, he's troubled by his own conscience. Because, I mean, I hope this isn't too much of a spoiler to say, but I already said it in the blurb. He commits murder. So he is a very complicated character, a very deeply troubled and layered character. I know we talk about quote unquote morally gray characters nowadays as though that's a recent thing. I guess it depends on how you define that term, but I would say for the most part, Raskolnikov is a morally gray character. He is not one note. There is so much to this character, and there's so much to say about how he's shaped by society and whether he can break free from that, how he grapples with that, and where his choices lie. And I think that this story is very much in response to the nihilism and disillusionment in society at that time, but it does go somewhere. And there are several other characters in the story, by the way. So the first half of the story does closely look at his character and his journey. Then as the story develops, we do get other perspectives, including his best friend, who I adored in this book. We also get a female character who who is somewhat of a mix between, I would say, Mary Magdalene archetypes and Virgin Mary archetypes. And then we also have Raskolnikov's family, his sister and mother who enter the picture, as well as several other characters as well. It is a very psychological journey, as I mentioned, and I had a pretty good experience reading this book. I'm still thinking about it. I'll say that. I am still deeply thinking about this story. I found myself fully invested as I was reading it. I read this alongside my mother. She's the one who got me to read it because it's her favorite book of all time. It's a reread for her, obviously. So we read the first 200 pages out loud to each other when I was visiting her in New Mexico. And then from there, we read on our own, but talked about it every other night on the phone. When I got to the end of the book, I was a little puzzled. I had a bit of a mixed response. I think it needed the ending it had, but at the same time, I think I was looking at it from a modern lens in such a way that it made it hard for me to totally buy it. I have a hard time explaining this, obviously, without spoilers. But there was a certain idea or fixed idea I had of this character, and I found I had a really hard time understanding how things at the end could happen the way they did. And at the same time, I understand that the way that people understood psychology back then was different than how we understand it now. So this is just my own issue. This is not a fault of the book. I think it was still incredibly well written. I still found that ending quite poignant. It did bring tears to my eyes at the same time as I had some trouble with it. And some of that was me projecting some personal experience onto the character and having some personal background, I think, that I was bringing into the story. Now, after doing some research on this book along with my mother, we found that some of the themes of this book could be deeply understood by understanding the work of Nietzsche, like the Übermensch philosophy. But it is important to keep in mind that this was written before Nietzsche's philosophy and probably didn't have a direct connection between the two, but I could see a parallel there if you wanted to look at the Übermensch philosophy. I think it could parallel the theme of this story as well. And I'll also mention that there was a biblical reference in this story that's important, and Friedrich Schiller was referenced. So it did have a lot of really interesting aspects of what was going on in society at the time and influences, cultural influences, philosophy just embedded into this layered narrative and deep psychological exploration. This is a story I could imagine I would get even more out of on a reread. But again, I think the hardest part for me was understanding how I felt about the end. But it was certainly well worth the journey, and I had such a wonderful time discussing this book with my mom and discovering why it's her favorite book of all time, why it's many people's favorite book of all time or favorite classic. Foster by Klara Keegan was a book that I listened to via audio in the month of August. I listened to Small Things Like These by the same author earlier this year, and I enjoyed listening to the audiobooks of both of these books because the narrators themselves are Irish and have fantastic accents that add a sense of authenticity and charm to the story. And I also picked up this book, Foster, because Bookish recommended it, so I was not disappointed. This particular story is very short. It's almost not even novella length. And we follow a young girl who is fostered to a childless married couple for a summer. This married couple happens to be relatives of her family, but she spends this summer in Wexford, Ireland, at a farm. And on the surface level, it's slice of life. It's her doing the menial tasks of day-to-day living, learning how to make bread, going to her first wake, interacting with this couple who care for her. But she's deeply experiencing what it's like to be cared for. The story also deals with what is not said as being very powerful, and it's perfect as Klara Keegan has a beautiful simplicity to her writing style that captures that poignancy, that captures that. And I did appreciate that this character, she fails to find the words to understand the complexity of what she's experiencing. This brought to mind Hemingway's iceberg effect. I thought it was achieved beautifully in this story, and I really enjoyed it. I have to say that I wasn't sure about the time period we were in. I kept getting the idea because of the rural setting that maybe this was taking place a long time ago. And then I looked it up and it turned out that the setting of this story was in 1981. And I didn't realize it was so recent. Unless I missed the year, I just didn't quite catch that. But yeah, it didn't feel like a very modern story. Not to say 1981 was yesterday by any means. I mean, that was a while ago, but I still got the sense that this could have been way further back than 1981. But this story did have that charm of a slower life. That is it for the books I read in the month of August. I'll go ahead and quickly mention that I was a guest on a Lonesome Dove discussion over on my friend Mata Books' channel. That particular discussion had some good variety as far as perspectives about the book, so I highly recommend checking it out if you've read Lonesome Dove. I was also a guest on my friend Kyle's channel for his series Kyle's Corner and had a great conversation with Kyle. He was a gracious host, so you could check that out if you want to. I'll leave links, of course, in the description below. And my Why Read discussion for the month of August was with BellTube and with Theo from Rekindled Reader. We had a wonderful time. I think that Theo and Brian hit it off instantly. And since then, even though this was in September and I'm doing this late, obviously, I'm going to go ahead and mention my September Why Read episode, which was with Vera and Tom Orange. And we all were orange in celebration of Tom's color. That was so much fun. I had a great time with that chat. And of course, the live chat discussion was wonderful in both episodes, as well as, of course, all the comments in for the replay. So thank you so much for your support with all those discussions and with watching this video. Please let me know in the comment section below if you've read any of the books I've mentioned, if you're planning to read any of the books I've mentioned. Thank you so much for watching and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.